Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brett Schaefer, Director of Business Development for the InSource Group, and welcome to our live webinar today, where we will discuss how dependent should you be on the cloud. And on behalf of the InSource Group and our partner, Abacus Technical Services, we're glad that you're joining us. You know, the InSource Group, we've been based in Dallas since 1992, and we work with our clients to provide a complete spectrum of flexible solutions for your IT staffing and recruiting needs, including contract to hire, and direct hire positions. We're excited to do this as this is our 9th webinar. And while we do miss seeing everyone live at an actual luncheon event venue, we will continue to do these webinars virtually with the hopes of getting together again real soon. You know, over the past 14 months, we've had to adapt to new work solutions and situations, a lot of it being on the cloud, as we strive to figure out what our new norm is going to be. And our topic today regarding cloud dependency, I think this really gives everyone a chance that has already moved into the cloud an opportunity to do an assessment to see if it's working the way they thought it was going to work, as much as their expectations were hit. And for those who are contemplating a move to the cloud, this may give you some additional items to consider before doing it. So before I get started, everybody now is on the Zoom. You see something, it's either on your right-hand side or your left-hand side, a little Q&A. I want to remind everyone this is an interactive webinar. So if you have any questions that come up during our conversation, please submit them through the Q&A. And at the end of our conversation, the last 10 or 15 minutes or so, we'll have a Q&A panel that will go through, ask questions of our guests here. So this will be great. So don't be a stranger and let us know what questions you have. And so speaking of our panel, let me make some introductions here. So first off, we have Jeff Payn. Jeff, give us a wave. Jeff Payn. Jeff is Google. He is a Google Cloud Customer Solution Engineer for Google, where he helps a variety of clients build cloud-centric business models. And Jeff has over 20 years of executive IT leadership experience, providing solutions for public and private companies, spanning a variety of industry verticals. Jeff has a demonstrated track record of helping companies improve efficiency, increase revenue, reduce costs, and create innovative cloud migration services. Jeff, thanks for being here. We appreciate it. And next we have Louis Martinez. Louis, give us a wave. All right. Louis is the Chief Information Officer at EHR Data, a cloud-first organization that utilizes data insights and new technology to help improve everyday healthcare for providers and patients. Louis has over 15 years of providing executive leadership and technology and has a proven track record of building long-lasting and sustainable technology solutions. He has successfully led teams with Citibank and is a former CIO at Omnisys. Louis, thanks for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
All right. So before we let's go ahead and get started. But the first question I have is I want each panel member to give us a little 30 or 40-second intro about themselves, what your current role is, and what you're doing. Jeff, why don't you go first?
Hey, everyone. Let me first start by saying, Brett and Julian, I appreciate you putting this panel together. Really looking forward to the conversation, and to my fellow panelist, Louis, as well. My background, a little bit further of what Brett just described. I'm currently a Google customer engineer. And basically what that means is I work closely with our internal sales team and primarily with our current customers and our future customers, helping them to understand Google technology and helping them understand a pathway from potentially their on-premise infrastructure into more of a cloud-centric business model.
Okay.
My turn, huh?
That's your turn.
First of all, I'm jealous. Everyone is saying hi to Julian, and I think we're spectators to his show. So thanks for the first introduction there, Brett. And the thing that we are highly involved at EHR Data is working to put the patient back in control of their data. I think that maybe there's a misnomer in the United States that that folks do have access to all of their information and can control that. And that's not necessarily the case with so many silos. So our organization is working to put together the solutions that will bring the silos together and hopefully someday collapse them so that they no longer exist, which hopefully the intended outcome is a better outcome for the patient. We have a long road ahead of us, but we're ready for that challenge, and we're doing everything in cloud. We're a small group. It's a startup, so we're running fast, and that's the best way for us to get there quickly. So it's been a fun journey so far. We're almost year one into it, and have made a lot of progress, and excited to see what happens next.
Great. Well, thank you guys both. So with our topic today revolving around cloud dependency, tell me what you are most passionate about when you're talking about the cloud. Jeff, why don't you go first? Oh, Jeff, you hit mute. You hit mute real quick.
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually joined Google because I am very passionate about the cloud. So from that standpoint, the cloud offers so many different technologies that are really hard to attain when you're working for your on-premise infrastructure. And we're talking about data analytic opportunities and AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning technologies that are difficult to attain outside of a cloud nowadays. The ability to be more nimble from an infrastructure standpoint. I used to be a CIO, and I remember the days where, when you needed to scale up, you had to go to procurement, you had to get the budget approved, you had to order the servers. When the servers finally came in, you had to rack and stack them and things like that. The cloud takes away all of those issues. And again, I just love talking to customers about a journey to the cloud. So that's my initial thoughts, and maybe Louis, you can add to that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great response. And I agree. I do come from the world before leadership times where I was in that rack and stack and watching that happen. And I love the lights. I love the loudness of a data center, but I can say that I don't miss it because that procurement cycle, it's a 5-year turnaround typically in the world of managing your own data center and infrastructure. And now the thing that makes me so excited about what we're able to do in cloud is that we're turning our staff into folks that can serve themselves, working within the parameters of what we try to put in place so that we can make sure that we're managing costs. But it truly is a small team that can now work together and put things together the way that they expected on common architectures that are approved by the organization. But no longer do they have to wait 6 months, maybe 3 months for servers to arrive, for capacity to be increased, right. Storage, et cetera. So yeah, it's really fun to see them take that ownership and love it because it's right. available to them. So yeah, that's the funnest part, is watching their reaction to being able to be part of their own solution.
Very good.
Yeah, and one thing I would follow up with is that, I think really considering a cloud journey, again, I referenced my days as a CIO when literally I probably spend 85 to 90% of my budget just what I call keeping the lights on from an IT standpoint. And I think as you start to shift from thinking about managing stuff in your own data center to then moving into a more of a managed cloud service environment, that's really freeing up a lot of our customers the ability to start thinking about innovating from an IT standpoint, as opposed to just literally keeping the lights on. So right. I think that right. innovation opportunity is key when you're considering that journey to a cloud.
Okay. All right. Well, great. Good answers, guys. I know some of our audience members here today, they work for smaller companies. So what drawbacks are there, for going to the cloud if you're with a smaller organization? Louis, why don't you take that?
Actually, so as a small organization, it's probably there's a benefit, I believe. When we started, our company evolved out of a sale of some assets. And so we had cash to have a good runway. And the thing that we decided is that we were not going to have our own data center. We were going to go cloud first for everything. HR, account, everything is done in cloud. The only thing that's in our building, who I'm not in my building today,
Right.
is a network. So that's all we want to have. And what we're able to do is really build fast. But there was a lot of work that was done at the other company to make sure that what we were putting together was something that was sustainable, manageable, and not solving for the short term. So a small company could definitely benefit from starting in cloud, but you do have to realize that you're going to invest in a different type of skill set. Even if they're the people that are part of your organization now, training, I think, is crucial. And you'll have staff that will ask for that. And as long as they have access to that and the tooling and the support of the executive staff to make it available to them, they will do a good job for you. They appreciate that. It's almost a perk. But the cost containment has been it's so easy to see that versus the days of what Jeff is talking about, keeping the lights on, and then 5 to 10% of your budget is left for future projects. It just doesn't work or scale.
Right. Jeff, you see any drawbacks that a smaller organization would have going to the cloud?
Yeah, what kind of immediately comes to mind is when I'm working with our smaller customers, and kind of what I mean by that is companies that maybe are 500 million or less in revenue. That's kind of the Google definition of a small company. But a lot of these companies, they really just don't know where to start when they start thinking about a cloud journey. And maybe they have a concern about the lack of skills as they transition, from managing an on-premise infrastructure into the kind of skills they need when they start migrating to a cloud. And some of my customers, will flat out tell me, well, the cloud's going to be more expensive. I can run it cheaper on-premise. So I have to have those conversations with some companies that have that concern.
Right.
And then, a lot of companies are looking for specific use cases, workloads in particular that they can start with migrating to that cloud. So those are kind of the 4 things that I run into, kind of pushbacks or concerns when I'm talking with those smaller companies.
Right. Okay. All right. Jeff, you had mentioned to me that, organizations and technologies change, thus the customer's needs change as well. What did you mean by that?
Well, moving to a cloud is of course a technology shift, but it's really an organizational shift as well. So, as you're thinking about that migration to the cloud, again, you have to make sure that you understand the technologies that brings to you, but also the organization changes that are going to be required to support that shift. So as I'm talking to companies, I'm talking to them, from a cloud standpoint, I'm talking to them from a competitive standpoint. A lot of companies, I start talking about the whole concept of, application modernization. So you're looking at the applications that these huge monolithic applications that you typically have. We call them, the legacy applications. So I start talking about how you get into application modernization, which is really about microservices and running on Kubernetes and things like that.
Right.
And you have to shift your organization around that new development and DevOps kind of a process as well. So I talk DevOps, I talk about application modernization. So those are the main conversations I'm having with customers.
Okay. Lewis, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, a good way that we kind of approach it is from the other side. So down to the end consumer, we've become a society of I want it now. It's not the I'm going to drive out 2 hours to get this guitar, or I'm going to order it on online catalog and it'll be 3 months before it gets here. I go to Amazon, or I go to something that's going to promise me that I can have it in a day or less. I ordered something the other day and Amazon delivered it 3 hours later. And that kind of thing is just crazy
Right.
from a consumer perspective.
Right.
And so it's kind of the same thing in the technology delivery world, right? That's what we're experiencing. So again, we go back to, if you're trying to deliver infrastructure for your team to be able to do something, that is so difficult when you're managing full on-prem. Even, you could talk about people who have good VMware administrators who can offer up all that capacity fairly quickly, but not at the speed of cloud. I hate to kind of say that. I mean, it's just the modernization of where things are going. But yeah, the end consumer is kind of driving for us a lot of the innovations. It has to be fast. It has to be real time. And I have to have it right when I need it. So the best way for us to be able to manage that is to put those workloads in places where we can trust that we can work on application delivery. We don't have to necessarily focus so highly on managing infrastructure anymore.
Right. Right. Gosh, Lewis, I forgot you played the guitar. We could have you play a tune for us later on today. I had thought about this. So
Yeah,
anyway,
the only thing I would add
concept.
is, yeah, the other thing I would add, and I think Lewis kind of touched on this, is, to stay competitive in the world today, if a company's not in the cloud, then I can pretty well rest assured that their competitors are. And the IT departments are, again, being asked to focus on what's bringing value to the business, as opposed to, again, going back to that keep the lights on kind of scenario. And as a result of that, the organization really needs to focus on, again, bringing that value to the business as quickly as possible.
Right.
From an application development standpoint, that means, going into, again, I mentioned more of a DevOps process, again, to deliver features and functionality quicker to the business, again, so the business can meet their business goals.
Right. Okay. All right. So how does one manage the costs associated with the cloud? I mean, who's responsible for monitoring this? Lewis.
That would be me.
That would be you.
Yeah.
Okay.
But so that would be me for now. So we've been at this, as I said, about 8 months now, and we've seen our costs. We had predicted a cost, and that's all we could have done. We couldn't really project. It was purely prediction at that point. And we're holding true to staying under what I believed we were going to be able to run at a monthly rate. Now we know when it's time to scale, that's going to change. But what our appetite was very comfortable with, we're able to match that or find ways to tune systems to maybe smaller after we monitor capacity, things like that. So yeah, I know that's a grotesque thing to say, but I do get a kick out of looking at our spend on certain assets and certain types of utilities that we're using within our service provider. So the areas that I look for are, hey, what's new here that wasn't necessarily, put through the request pipeline to say, we're going to use a graph database now, and it's this much per hour. Well, those things are great and fine. They're experimental. We want the teams to innovate and try to bring, to Jeff's point, value to the company, which ends up as value to our end customer. And so those things we'll monitor that, and if it's worth putting into our portfolio, then we'll adjust our forecasts. But yeah, you do have to watch for those situations where someone plays outside of the sandbox and starts to spin up things that might not necessarily be in the best or direct needs of the business. But yeah, I watch that today. At some point, I totally will turn that over to our infrastructure head and let us know what our spend is. And it's so broken down and nice in the platforms today that if you see yourself doing something crazy in a egress or ingress perspective from the network, you can ask yourself, what's bleeding out of our environment that maybe shouldn't do that. So
Absolutely.
it's a good monitoring kind of concept as well.
Yeah. Jeff, is there anybody else other than the CIO that should monitor these costs?
Yeah, and it really, it really depends on the size of the organization.
Yep.
Lewis is taking that on because he has a relatively small IT department. So that would be a typical kind of scenario at a smaller company. But as I'm talking to, enterprise companies, and Google's definition is a company over like $1 billion in revenue, that to us is a enterprise company. So those companies typically, have a larger IT staff that is specifically there to monitor costs. And I'll try to keep my Google sales hat off a little bit, but most of the cloud companies, including Google, they have analytics and online portals that our customers can access to monitor their spend. Now but having said all that, even my enterprise customers can kind of be living in the Wild West, as I call it, a bunch of shadow IT that I call, where, people are spinning up new services and things like that. So again, I think you still need to have some kind of a change control process internally to manage those new services that are spun up. So I highly recommend, somebody monitoring the consumption costs and, the things that have been spun up. But, in particular, to help control costs, Google has a lot of technologies that will help a customer control costs. I won't get into all of those now because there's similar technologies that Amazon and Azure have as well.
Okay. What do you guys think is the biggest or the greatest fear that some companies have that they want to stay away from the cloud? What do you think is something that's keeping people away from the cloud? Lewis?
I guess, Lewis.
Yeah, so I think that one of the biggest fears is the enormity of what the service that you offer today as a company, to actually see that or envision that leaving, say, your on-prem deployment to cloud, and especially if it's a monolithic solutions. So as Jeff mentioned, those are very big decisions that could cost a lot of money if you fail. And it takes one failure actually for people to be really turned off by, we're not architected for cloud. We're not, our business doesn't suit the cloud capabilities and utility. But a lot of that is planning. So I think that the scariest part is to actually dive in and actually start to, Jeff mentioned it at the beginning, pick one of those workloads that you might think is a good opportunity to use it as a proof of concept to move to cloud. And then see if you're even an immature organization. I will call ours immature. We're working on being mature, but I'm just going to be plain and honest, right? We're trying to watch what the cost of the different services are so that we know where our investments are. And if that's not of value to the company, but we're spending more money than we're making on a particular service, we need to ask ourselves if that's something that we need to be offering. So in that same vein, if you're looking at a particular workload and moving it over, not every organization knows what that workload costs internally, but some people could have an idea of what percentage of the storage that cost might be, what percentage of it does it take to back it up, what percentage of it is compute, network, things like that. So you can come to some sort of idea of what the cost is. And then as you shift it into cloud, and lift and shift is going to be maybe just as expensive as moving it over. So you're really not going to find a benefit. It's all about modernization, like Jeff mentioned, but taking that chance is probably, you just have to jump out there and have the guts to fail. But know that you're going to stick with it and try to get there, unless it's a colossal failure and it just simply says, well, they don't support Commodore the servers, so it's not going to work for me.
Right. Jeff, you have anything you want to add to that? Any other fears that you've heard of?
Yeah, and again, as I'm talking to a lot of my customers, be it smaller companies and larger companies that haven't dipped their toes into the cloud yet. Again, I come back to something that I said earlier about a lot of them really don't know where to start, and because of that, there's that unknown, so that causes a little bit of a trepidation for some of our customers. And again, my job is to walk them through that, working with Google. Some customers, literally have said they feel like they're losing control, from an on-premise to a cloud business model. Security always comes up, so every company has concerns about keeping their data out of the bad people's hands, and costs. Again, I kind of mentioned that earlier. Some companies believe that cloud just costs more. And for my answer to a lot of these companies, again, as they're going into their cloud journey, is I use the analogy of, well, let's crawl, walk, and run approach. Let's identify a couple of use cases, a couple of workloads that would make sense for you to get into the cloud, to get your hands wet, and just see how that goes from a technology and, again, from an organizational standpoint too.
Okay, no, very good. So guys, we've moved into the cloud. There's nothing to worry about after you've done it, right? You can just kind of wash your hands and move on, right? What do we need to educate ourselves on there, Lewis?
So if you get to that point, you're wearing a t-shirt, the Kool-Aid is delicious, but that's usually not the case, right? So
right.
But then in my experience has been that that's when the fun starts. It's really hard to either start to build out in there if that's not the world that your organization comes from. And it's really, really hard if you're at the enterprise level, what Google's definition of that might be, and to think of how big your technology infrastructure or platform is, to just fathom moving that into someone else's hands to put them in a cloud service. So once you're in, that's when the fun starts for at least my experience is you still are my number one job is to be a good steward of how we're spending the funds for what we're doing in cloud. But it's also my opportunity for the team to show them that I'm their biggest cheerleader, right? I'm asking them to go and try things, just to discover some of the newer techniques, some of the newer methods of operation that will give them the ability to do work faster later on as they become experts on certain techniques. So I think it's a big win once you get there, but it's just like anything else. If you're not watching the ball's going to get away from you, right?
Right.
You've got to maintain that visibility into what the group is looking at, working on. But that's our job in terms of creating priorities, creating certain boundaries. I kind of call them loose boundaries, but it really is about being the cheerleader for the team and making sure that the things that you want to ensure from the beginning, the security aspect, being a security-minded technologist, protecting the assets, protecting your services, making sure that they are scalable, performant, all those things have become kind of more of a challenge for the team to continue that, to feed off the wins. And
right.
That's the funnest thing that I see or have been lucky enough to see so far. It's when we have our stand-ups, I'll be one of the ones that always does the little applause sign when I hear
right.
something that just sounds so much like a big win, at least for me.
Right.
And I like the team to see that, because that's what they're getting out of being able to react quickly with the platform that they're using.
Right. No, very good. Excellent. Um, cloud readiness assessment, in the context of digital transformation, cloud is often a priority for an organization to have a competitive advantage. And you guys have already kind of talked about this a little bit. An assessment needs to be done to determine capabilities of an organization to migrate to the cloud based on its environment. Louis, you had an example about this that you talked to us here a little while back. What would you say what could you add to that? What was your experience with that?
And so when we first started this, this was at another organization. When we first started that migration, that we had to put a lot of insight and effort into what our service catalog actually looked like. And then we had to define where we wanted to start. Back to Jeff's point, and it's extremely important. So what were the things that would give us success or show us success if we were able to get those into cloud that would kind of give drive for the executive staff and the board? Hey, this looks like a good move. It looks, we're going to get the benefit of all the things that a provider would give you in terms of high availability, all the good things that come as part of the utility. But the checklist is by no means short. It's definitely, you have to remember that during the migration, at some point you're gonna have to cut over. So
right.
What are you doing to ensure that the customer doesn't, it's seamless to a customer, the service that you're providing? Sometimes it's hard to say, we're going to be offline for 3 days. So after that, everything will be great. We think, bear with us.
Right.
That's not the experience you want to give to your end users, because they likely have customers that they're having to service as well. So the checklists are vast and long, but a lot of it is about how you're going to protect your end user and make sure that they have a good experience on the other side. It's best if they don't even know that something happened.
Right.
Unfortunately, that wasn't my experience, but we mitigated it as fast as we could. And we have the tool expertise from those cloud providers to bring in architects that helped us get through some pretty major problems on cutover night. We got through that in about 24 hours. And that was a fast turnaround for what we were experiencing. We were sluggish, and it was a couple of changes. It's literally when we got the right people on the phone, a few changes that took care of everything. So it's having the right people to complement your staff that are maybe a little more mature in managing cloud platforms.
Right. Jeff, what could you add to that? Cloud readiness assessment.
Yeah, and when I'm talking to my customers, that's if they're not in the cloud currently, one of the first things that I usually offer up is to do an assessment of their on-premise infrastructure. And Google, and I know the AWS and Azure, they both have tools that we can deploy on-premise that will automatically assess what they're running on-premise, be it in a virtual infrastructure or physical servers. And those tools, they not only give you the number of servers and VMs that they're running, but it can also show you all of the application dependencies to tell you which applications are talking to other applications. And these tools will also give you some what I would call right sizing recommendations as you're moving from on-premise into cloud. And what I mean by right sizing is a lot of companies are, they're running servers and are definitely underutilizing their compute resources. And part of an assessment, the tool will help us tell the customer that they can, go to maybe a smaller size VM when they get to the cloud. And the tools will also help you figure out how and when to migrate certain applications to the cloud. And there's, different ways of doing that. Real quickly, there's what's called a lift and shift, where an application can be very easily migrated to the cloud with little or no changes. Some of our customers have workloads that will easily do a lift and shift. Some of the applications may need to be modernized before they move to the cloud. And some customers, they'll do the lift and shift, and then they choose to modernize after they get to the cloud. So those are the conversations that I have with with my customers on what the best path of that migration strategy is as it gets to the cloud. But what I do want to say is there are tools that we can deploy to help do that assessment.
Right. Okay. All right. Very good. And just a quick reminder to our audience here, I have one question remaining. And if you have any other questions you'd like to ask the panel here, please do that in the Q&A right now. Final question, guys. When a company is planning to move to the cloud, they should provide a cloud readiness questionnaire. What items should be on this list? Lewis.
Sure. So the first thing that we asked ourselves is we have a data center where we were in startup mode. We have a data center in our building. So should we just start with a small VMware implementation or some unified computing? And the immediate decision we made was no, we want to start cloud first, because we believed in the product or services that we're going to offer. And the issue that we did not want to find ourselves having to deal with later was, so now that we're at this scale, what we're hoping will be massive scale, now we need to figure out how we're going to do that, because we're going to outgrow this data center. We're going to go into a colo and we'll have to fill that thing out. So now the question is, what do you see as your 1 year out plan for us? And the fact that I had a lot of faith in what we're working on, that's where we naturally started is, okay, we're going to start. Right now we have, I think, 50 servers spun up. A month ago, it was 30. 2 months before that, it was 10. So we are scaling and still saving and keeping our money or our costs in check. But it was definitely, for me, one of those things where, from an executive perspective and from being the sponsor for what we're doing from a platform delivery, is that I wanted to empower the team. Again, I said I wanted to take infrastructure out of it. Now, I mean, we're not totally out of it, but we're automating everything that we can to be a service delivery for the development staff, so that we can just work on product and innovation. So, the questionnaire was easy for our executive staff. It was, do we utilize what we have access to in our data center? And the fast answer was no. And in fact, we just shut down everything in that data center earlier this week. Finally, just everything's turned off. The UPS is turned off. We had one giant UPS that happened to run a badge system. So we have to run one giant UPS just because we can't find out where the hell it's plugged in. But
right.
We'll find it. But other than that, everything that we have moved to and are learning in our journey, and a continued journey in the cloud, is that we have a good head start on where I think a lot of people are and should not be scared to take on this journey. Just need to be aware that you need to plan. And you need support, and you've got to be able to tell a good story to the executive staff and support that with just a handful of metrics. Get that buy-in and support, and if the team hears that, that's amazing what can get done.
Yeah. Oh, great. Jeff, what could you add to that questionnaire?
Yeah, so I know there are kind of generic cloud readiness questionnaires, but I guess when I'm talking to a customer about their cloud readiness, it's kind of around 4 different topics, a few of which maybe I've already touched on. But so the first thing that I ask a customer is, number one, do you have a cloud strategy? And a lot of them say maybe yes, maybe again, maybe no. And again, so I'm drilling into, okay, Mr. Customer, you're thinking about going to the cloud. tell me why you're going to the cloud. Is it to reduce, maintenance costs? Are you having skills gaps and things like that? Do you want to avoid CapEx costs and go to more of an OpEx cost model? So that's number one. And then number two, from a skills level, your IT skills, where are they in the journey of being able to support, a movement to the cloud? Because it is a little bit of a different skill set. And I think I talked about that a little bit. Just because you're going to the cloud doesn't necessarily mean you can just kind of like, be hands off. The analogy that I use is, going to a cloud is like playing with a Lego set. The cloud offers you a bunch of Legos, but it's really up to the customer to use those Legos to build the solution into the cloud. So, you really need to understand the cloud architecture and be able to use those Legos to build that solution. And then, assessing your on-premise architecture, and your on-premise systems, talked about that a little bit already. Security, again, you need to make sure you understand your security framework. And then finally, I would say, let's just have a conversation about your operational readiness. Again, that kind of gets to your staff and your organizational structure as you start thinking about moving to the cloud. So those are really the 4 or 5 assessment things that I really talk to my customers about.
Okay, boy, both of those are some great questions that customers need to consider. Hey, Jeff Lewis, thank you again for your time today, your insight about the cloud. I think that this is going to be really beneficial for our audience. As a matter of fact, it does look like we have a couple of questions that have come in from the audience. So now I'd like to bring in Julian Placino. Julian is the founder of Pathways to Success. You can catch his work on YouTube and LinkedIn. And he's going to go over some of the audience questions that we provided during this conversation. Julian, take it away. What do you got? And I'll mute myself here.
All right, Brett, thank you very much for that introduction. And Jeff and Lewis, congratulations. Amazing conversation. I think our viewers will have many excellent takeaways, but we want to continue adding value to our attendees by answering your questions. And the first is from Jerry Welch. And Jerry asks, with procurement made easier, when will the cloud's total cost of ownership come under more scrutiny from governance and finance teams? And we can start with you, Jeff.
Well, I will say that, managing your costs and kind of knowing what your costs are more of a challenge in the cloud than they are on premise, because cloud is all about consumption-based billing. I mean, literally Google certain services we bill by the second. So part of a challenge when I'm talking to customers, again, around costs, is I really need to get into a conversation with them about what the services they're going to be using, and how often those services are going to be used, so I can estimate their consumption costs. So again, from that standpoint, it is somewhat challenging. As Lewis alluded to earlier, those costs can kind of get out of control if you're not watching them carefully. So that's what I mentioned about the change control process and the governance process, to really keep your eyes on costs. And at least from a Google standpoint, we provide total visibility on what the costs are almost in real time, so you can monitor those.
Thank you, Jim. Lewis?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I'm so glad for you that you have a procurement process that works. It works smoothly. That's awesome. So I haven't had that privilege. So what I would say is that the way that we look at it from the perspective of spend is that we are always looking at service bundles. And what I mean by that is it's an architecture concept, right, of making sure that we try to put like services in a quote unquote like bucket. And then if they talk to a different service, you put those buckets talk to each other. But what happens what has happened, what I've seen in traditional traditional on-prem solutions is that well, I just need another server. I need another server. I'm at capacity. I need another server. But if you look at the whole spectrum of what those servers are doing, and you take a look at what the utilization is, it might be, an average of 30% consumption along the path. And especially if you have timed workloads, you're not a 24/7 shop. You have dead time, but you're still paying for that. So that's one of the nice things about what we do in cloud is that for those services that can be tuned down during low service need, it's in there. It's built in the auto scaling, or if you're using, as Jeff mentioned, Kubernetes, you can take care of it that way. So that's really one of the nice benefits, is how the system is reactive based on the rules that you put in place. In the traditional procurement, what I have seen is just so easy to for someone to ask for something, and when you ask for justification, you look at some reports that maybe are not inclusive of the entire portfolio of servers that maybe back something. So it's I'm not saying it's purely one-sided, but it may not be the entire view of what's really going on.
Thank you, Louis, for that. And thank you, Jerry Welch, for your question. That was a great one. The next question we have is from Sean McPartlin. And Sean, forgive me if I don't get the full essence. There was a lot of context here, but I'll do my best to summarize it. He says, what we have found is that the cloud seems to be slower when you follow a lift and shift model versus an app refactor model. What do you do when you're dealing with a customer that does not want to pay to refactor apps? And this time we'll first start with you, Louis.
Yeah, that is a tough one. I think both Jeff and I have touched on the fact that when you are looking at a process of lift and shift, you're typically talking about legacy technologies or legacy services. There has to be a mentality of investment in modernizing those applications. And truly, it may be some period of investing in the refactoring of that service to modernize it, but it's going to pay dividends in the future versus what you're paying now without realizing that we're just stuck here. We're going to pay this amount of money to keep this service running, when who knows, if you refactored it, you might see such bloat in that technology that you might be able to cut that by a third, by a quarter, maybe by a half. So I have been part of a project that, certain services did perform more, slower in cloud. And the quick solution is, well, just give me more compute. And that's a short-term solution. It's tough. I'm stopping short of saying you have to consider the fact that if you move that workload into cloud, you should invest the time to minimize tech debt by working on some refactoring. Otherwise, that's not really a great move. It's not really a great idea to move if you're just trying to get off your own compute into someone else's.
Thank you, Louis. Jeff?
And as I'm listening to Louis's answer and the question as well, again, to me, it comes down to having a conversation with the customer on, why are they moving to the cloud? If part of that answer is that they're going to use that migration strategy to the cloud to employ better technologies and be more nimble, being able to deploy services as well. Again, there's multiple ways to get to the cloud. The easiest of which, what I said, is the lift and shift. Basically take your application as is, move it to the cloud. But a lot of my customers are only using that as a kind of a first step. One of the strategies is, hey, I want to get out of my data center as quickly as possible. Let's do the lift and shift to reduce my data center exposure. And then once I'm in the cloud, we'll focus on modernizing at that point. And quite honestly, that's a strategy a lot of my customers take.
Gotcha. Excellent. It seems a common theme that I'm seeing here is everyone is sort of cost-minded. So is there any advice that you have not yet shared about recommendations to help customers control costs?
Well, again, I may be repeating myself, but Google at least offers an line dashboard that our customers have access to, that they can monitor their costs. And there are many solutions that Google offers to help reduce those costs as well. Whether it be, again, I'm trying to keep my Google sales hat off here. But there are solutions that we can advise our customers to use to help them reduce costs. Maybe on storage, we allow a storage lifecycle management where you can continue to move less frequently used storage into cheaper alternatives. We have ways to reduce your compute costs. We have ways to literally, if you have an application that needs to scale up and scale down depending upon load, literally we have solutions where if there's essentially no load, you start literally deleting your compute costs. Again, all around to help you reduce those costs. Again, we have many other ways to help coach our customers, but those are a few of them.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, those are all really, really good points. And one of the things you mentioned about the compute cost, right? I think if anyone were going to do the exercise of laying out their service map and building out that cloud journey strategy, I will bet anyone dinner, write it down, Brett. I will bet anyone dinner that does this exercise that's really, really wanting to move to cloud, but is trying to make sure that they're not going to incur some incredibly, some costs that they're not aware of. If you lay down what you have in your environment today, especially if it's one that's anywhere older than just 5 years, because that's how fast we're all moving today, right? You're going to find some technology or some service or some dependency that there's a better way to do it now, and it's cheaper, and it's available as a service in the cloud, or you don't need it anymore. We don't do a great job because of the speed of business of deprecating or just shutting down services that we don't use anymore. Our service catalog is fairly static and only grows. But when you do this exercise, you really find out what it is that has to move and identify the opportunity for things that just don't really service your business anymore. So if someone finds that they have to move every single thing, every little thing, even like I'm just talking just a file share that supports their entire service, I guarantee you there's a better way of doing it in cloud that can service multiple parts of the service, not just one-offs. So if someone can tell me, hey, here's our due diligence, here's our plan, and I need to take everything, I'd love to have dinner and discuss that, and it's on me.
Thank you, Louis. We've got just a couple more questions here. This next question is from Steve Gunner, and he is asking, how easy or difficult was it for your developers and IT staff to transition to the cloud? We'll start with Jeff.
In general, I don't think most of my customers have much difficulty doing that. And when I say that, I'm talking about the developers, the people who are sitting down writing code. Because in general, they can log onto a server or a dev environment or production environment in the cloud just as easily as they can on premise. But having said all that, like I said, as you move into the cloud, companies really need to start taking a look at how they're managing their resources from an organizational standpoint. Most organizations, when they're on premise, have very siloed organizations, literally to the point where they have a team that's managing storage. They have a team that's managing servers. They have a team that's managing backup solutions, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of silos and not necessarily a lot of communication between the infrastructure people and the software development staff. So I mentioned DevOps earlier. The DevOps process tries to bring those two groups together to make more accountability, primarily on the software development staff, to make sure that they're building resilient applications. So again, from an organizational standpoint, I strongly suggest companies that aren't using DevOps to strongly look at that organizational model.
Totally agree. And same thing for what we've done is it is a different skill set, but you'll excite your staff if you are talking about a journey to cloud and incentivize or motivate them to train themselves on even the basics. The basics give you a really good head start in preparing to be able to manage your workloads and your delivery or software development and infrastructure management inside cloud. It's a different skill set. It really is, but it's new, it's fresh, it's fun. So for those innovators, those technologists that want to continue to grow their skill set and be relevant, especially where we're headed with fast turnaround of everything. And remember, cloud is always like the latest and greatest technologies are out there, the latest servers, the procurement process. You might already miss a generation by the time that server lands in your data center. So the feedback that we get from our staff is they're grateful for the fact that we do support and pay for that training. And they go as far as getting the certifications and putting that on their email signatures. It's just badge of honor kind of thing. But, we can do that because we're small. I imagine it'd be very, very expensive at a big scale. But as long as we're able to do that and offer that, we're going to keep it up. So yeah, it's a fun opportunity for people who are interested in the future of what they're doing from a developer, infrastructure manager, or management to move into the cloud world. There's some cool stuff out there to do.
And the other thing I would add is that I'm seeing is companies move into the cloud, their software development team actually has more control than previously. And what I mean by that is, nowadays, when you're in the cloud, as long as the infrastructure has been handed to you, really the software development team can go off and do their thing without necessarily having to consult with the infrastructure team, which again, from a software development standpoint, I think, I talk to the programmers and they feel more empowered to get things done quicker, in order to add more value to the business.
Awesome.
And, these companies are using, they're using automated CI/CD pipelines, automating their deployments through tools like Jenkins or Ansible or things like that. You put those tools in the hands of the developers and just, watch them run, watch them get things done.
Awesome. Gentlemen, tremendous job answering all of our questions. The time is now 12:59. I'm going to turn things back over to Brett Schaefer. Thank you.
Hey, Julian, thank you very much for your time and help me put this together. I appreciate it. Lewis, Jeff, thank you guys also for your time and insight today. We really appreciate it. If anyone has any additional questions, send them over to us. We'll get that over to the panel and we'll respond back to you. Also, if anyone has any staffing needs that we can assist you with, as the market's really starting to pick up here in the Dallas area, contact us. We'd love to work with you. I hope everyone has a great day and we will see you next time. Thank you again.